Hey everyone, welcome back to Highly Unlikely with Josh and Jenaye. We are both here today and excited to dig into being a highly unlikely couple.
We are a highly unlikely couple.
We are, and we're going to talk about that.
Yes, even in preparation for this podcast, we've rediscovered just we're different. And
Right.
we prepare differently and we think differently. But God has done some great things.
Right?
Cool.
Okay, let's start with a question. Oh, I have to do the drum roll
I hope
every
it's a good
time.
one. Who is your role model?
Oh my.
Wow, these are good. These are good.
They are good questions. Who is my role model? I think I have different kinds of role model. Why do I always answer the question? It's
I
'cause
know,
you
I keep
ask it.
drawing, yeah.
It's okay. You have longer arms. If you did not know, Josh is 6'4". He's very tall, so he has very long arms. Who's my role model? Well, in the first episode we referenced this girl named Kendra, and I would say like she's my role model as in who I looked to growing up. And now she's just like a dear friend and a role model in other ways. I think there's someone who I hope to bring on the podcast sometime, but Debbie Lindell is her name. And I would say she's a role model in regards to someone like of faith, like strong woman, strong, like just strong personality. But gave me a role model of like coming in humility, hearing God's voice.
The voice of the Lord. This is going to be the tone of today.
You cannot let me get the giggles. I'm sorry. Hearing God's voice but like having grace and truth and So I would say those are two that come to mind.
Yeah, and I would say her husband, John, is somebody, I have a picture of him actually, as weird as it sounds, like in the front of one of my journals, because it's like the way, how he embodies like a knowledge of scripture, a boldness, like a godly authority and boldness that
he leads his family.
The way he leads his family, the way he prays. He's been through tribulation and just persevered. And so I think those are things where I just look at and say, his kids like love the Lord and are serving in the church. And and Debbie, in her own right is just this amazing woman. And so, I think.
Who's your role model growing up?
Well, probably my dad, and still is, in different ways. But
That's cool.
Yeah.
Good question. Deck of cards.
Yeah, that's a good question. We are going to talk about being a highly unlikely couple and really just wanting to tell some of our story. And we're probably going to laugh a lot because there's like, Jenaye even said grace and truth earlier in the conversation. And one of the things that she'll often say is, together we are like Jesus, right?
Yeah, Jesus teaches us, to be grace and truth, have both.
Yeah, and so I am
Josh is the grace and I'm the truth.
Yes. And it's okay. And we just emphasize those areas in our lives.
It's a joke, but those aspects of us have really helped the other person grow. Like, I think I've helped Josh to learn to like stand up for himself and like even have a backbone in some situations. And then Josh has really helped teach me a lot about humility and having grace for people. And
I said to one of my family members yesterday, like, Jenaye is the best mom because she's so intentional and with our kids just very gracious in teaching them when they do make mistakes. And so we're not saying either one of us lacks any grace or any truth, but we definitely draw those things.
But our natural like bend as our personalities. So if you guys, if you're single, do not tune out because we're going to talk about stuff that does pertain to those who are not in a relationship. But if you are, you'll find that, a lot is revealed in relationship.
Yeah.
And that revealing is not to say the other person's wrong or bad or how dare you point that out in me, but to lean into it and grow and change. Yeah. I think that's the most fun thing is watching how you've changed since I met you, 12 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I don't know the math on it, but.
Yeah, 11 years ago. It's been a while.
Well, and I think of, the way that we are as people, and a lot of that has to do, I'm a third child. My family dynamic was entirely different than Jenaye's. She's the oldest in her family. And I was probably, I was single till I was 28. And part of it was, if you do the soulmate philosophy of like I hadn't met the right person yet. But there's another part that is like there was stuff in my life that I was just not ready to be married, and I was not just single because I hadn't found the right person. I was single because I wasn't in a place where I was ready to sustain an enduring relationship. And so I know that there's people that are listening that are, single for either or both of those reasons. And so even just growing yourself and understanding who you are and your dynamic as a person, there's so much to say about
there's
it.
There's not a magic formula. It's not going to be like, if I grow enough, God's going to bring the person then.
Right.
No, you cannot manipulate God.
Right.
Just continue to serve him and be obedient and strive for contentment with much or with little in whatever area. And that's really the key.
Yeah.
In whatever season, married, single, widowed, anything, to that.
Yeah, and a lot of that came out even, some of the character stuff that I'm talking about too came out in our dating relationship where that was like some refining discipleship in my life.
Let's get into the dating relationship.
Let's talk about it. I was a pastor here at Evangel.
Dating.
Yeah. I was already on staff at Evangel. I felt like I lived in this glass house.
What was your title?
Young adults pastor, I think. And I was preaching a little bit on the weekends once in a while. And we had a great thing going with young adults. We were all hanging out every Sunday, well, pretty much every night of the week, and just enjoying that. And we had a young adult ministry called the UG at that time.
Which stood for?
United Generation. Yes. And we were bringing together college students and then young career professionals. And it was awesome. It was fun. We did a conference, had great stuff going on. And meanwhile, it was a young adult ministry, so everybody who was single was shopping, every time we got together. Who said that one time? We were trying to...
when Pastor Kyle came here.
I was not going to say the name. But,
sorry, Pastor
Kyle.
He's married
now, so
dude,
he
is. It's fine. When he came, he was single, and we hired him, and people were like suggesting like we could date, and he goes, no, I do my own shopping.
Yeah. It was awesome.
I don't need no one to do my own shopping for me. I'm sorry, Kyle, if I quoted that the wrong way.
No,
you
I
can
think
come
that
on
was,
and correct
I think that was spot on.
But
so.
I appreciated that of like, and I think that's essentially saying, no, I trust to like hear from the Lord when I'm supposed to pursue someone. And I love that confidence of like, no, I got this. You got to do it for me.
I think people had tried to set him up for years and years and years. Yeah. But so we were having a young adult night and having service. And meanwhile, Jenaye was a physical therapy student at UND.
Yeah, I was here for, I think, just the summer, right? Yeah, I was here for the summer. And I would work at a Christian basketball camp. That's actually where I heard the gospel for the first time. Yep. And it was life-changing. So I was coaching there. And one thing about the Christian life is you cannot do it without community. And so I was very much like, I could have chose to be alone or whatever, but I remember sitting on the bed of where I was staying, and I had heard about this UG thing, and I had seen about it on social media. Whitney Sievely, if you're listening, you had shared about it on Instagram, and I saw it, and I was like, I should go to that because I know Whitney, and she's pretty cool. And so I was sitting there, and I was like, I'm not gonna go. No, I don't know anyone. This is dumb. I'm not doing this. And I just felt impressed on my heart. And it was the Lord, but I felt like he said, do you want this to be a spiritually dry season or a spiritually fruitful season? And it was just this question. And I had a choice with it. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go. And so I went. And so anyone, if you come to Evangel or any other church, but especially if you come to Evangel, I've tried my best to make sure you don't feel awkward walking in because I was that person. I knew no one. I walked into what is now our East Auditorium. And so I walked into like the bigger room, which is like where service would be. Well, no one was really in there. And I was like, okay, what are we doing? So I walked back out and I walked to the desk, and Beth Fogarty was her name at the time, was sitting there, Beth Hermes now. And I just said, hi, I'm new here. What do you guys do? Like, what are you guys doing here? And I think if you're new or you're getting in, like, turning your life over to the Lord or trying to find Christian community, like be willing to be uncomfortable like that and just put yourself out there of I need friends who love Jesus or I'm here and I'm open and available. So It was cool because I was in PT school and she's standing there and her shirt she was wearing said University of Mary Physical Therapy. And I was like, what? So just cool how the Lord, when you take steps of faith, the Lord brings like these little details. So yeah, just was there and met some people, met a really sweet gal who like showed me around and was very hospitable. And I would say she had the gift of hospitality, made me feel very welcome. And then she's like, do you want to meet Pastor Josh? I was like, sure. And, we met, and I think I said, yeah, I'm here from UND, from Grand Forks. I'm only here for like 9 weeks. I have clinicals, but would love to get involved. I can serve, or I want to get in a Bible study. And I knew
all I
of
heard
you.
was you want to get involved.
Okay, whatever. Josh will fabricate some things,
this
and
story.
I will call him out on it.
Yeah.
So I had seen Josh's name before on Facebook because there were these two girls who were best friends who were dating brothers. And I had seen that on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that these brothers had a really weird last name.
Yep.
I don't know if we want to put our last name out. I guess it is out there. Last name Skjoldal, but it's spelt like Skjoldal.
It's Viking. It's Viking. Let's just say that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, met him and just kind of like moved on, like had the service, met some people. And we talked about this at one point, but like I was not shopping, as you said. Like that was just, I had like let that go.
Like, was it love at first sight, Jenaye?
No. Yeah. Well, first of all, I thought you were dating someone, but even if you weren't, but that just isn't me as a person. It still isn't. Like we'll have Alex Seeley on the podcast in a couple episodes, but admire her as a person like so much. But when I got to meet her in person, like I wasn't like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. That's just not me. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not gonna freak out that you're like amazing. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that says about me, but I think I just like take people at face value. Yeah. So I wasn't like, oh, it's this pastor. Ooh, no. So went to service, went along my life, was studying so much. So I was at coffee shops all the time, and we ran into each other like a couple more times throughout that week or something.
I remember that because I remember meeting you, remembering you, and then I went to a coffee shop and you were sat there. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the second time we talked.
Mm-hmm. I love how these stories are meshing together if you've listened to all the episodes, because when I met Josh, I said, hey, I'm at UND, and you're like, oh, my friends are going to go be pastors there.
Yeah, are going to go.
Yeah. What?
They hadn't gone
yet,
They hadn't.
Right? I had met them. They weren't even there. And you're like, they're going to start in August. And I was going to be gone until December on clinicals. And then that same night, you like did an offering for them because they were in like a rollover car accident. And that was the story of where I said God impressed like a number on my heart. And I sent and was obedient to that. And go listen to the episode. I tell the story. It's really cool. But so all these stories are aligning. But I digress. We saw each other at Starbucks.
Yeah. And then it gets real foggy for me after that point.
Gosh.
Because I mean, honestly, I remember like the first 2 times that we met, and I remember thinking, this is somebody that I could be interested in, or, that I would want to get to know, but not really knowing how to go about that. I lived with a group of guys, and I remember us talking, about that. I had been in a relationship that I'd gotten out of about a month before, and just not knowing like how, and I'm cautious. I am a conservative, cautious type person, as you'll find out. And just trying to figure out like, man, what does this look like? Where do we even go from here?
And I was like a visitor, like no one really knew me.
Right. No, not, and that's one thing we were talking about that the other day. You asked me, I think we were doing a conversation starter, and you said what initially drew you to me. And, I said, your intentionality, like the fact that you would show up, walk up to the table, say, hey, here I am. I want to get involved. What do I do? Like, and that was you in that season. And that's been you in every season with that level of intentionality. Yeah. But I remember kind of concocting a plan with my roommates of like how I could ask this girl, in our Christian community of young adults, what you did is you asked them if they wanted to get coffee. It was non-committal, but committal enough that you could get to know somebody safely, even if it didn't go well.
You need to stop doing air quotes because
I'm sorry.
You can't hear air quotes.
Air quotes. It's a very Christian culture thing of like, I'm going to dabble before I actually commit. And, and so we concocted a plan that next young adult service, I was going to go over, talk to her again, and then see if we could hang out.
I don't think I knew that like your roommates were in on this plan. That's
You
kind of funny.
You didn't. And so I had great roommates. We had a lot of fun, but we were at that service. It got over, and I'm like making my way over to Jenaye to ask her out. And I hear this voice behind me go, Pastor Josh. And I was like, like, not now.
That's not my name.
Yeah, I can't hear you. And I turned to the person, and they ended up like having a conversation with me about somebody. So meanwhile, one of my roommates realizes that Jenaye is about to leave. And so he's like trying to stall her.
I vividly remember this moment. And you guys had chips and salsa. It was like chips and salsa hangout, like nacho night. So I was standing there just eating my chips and salsa at a high top round table, talking to people. And it was Dauber. Kevin, if you're listening, Dauber came over. And I think I had met him. Yeah, because he was like with you or something. And he's like asking me questions and kind of like leaning in and talking to me. And in my mind, I was like, uh-oh. I was just like, I am not here to like date people. Like, I am not here. So it actually made me leave quicker.
Yeah.
The fact, if it was like a girl trying to just like be friends and talk, I think I would have sat and talked for a while. But the fact that it was just like, because once you're in your 20s, guys, like, let's just call it what it is. When you're like intentionally talking to someone, it should go somewhere. Don't goof around. So that's what I took it as. Like, so it actually made me leave quicker.
Right. So she was out, and I was out of luck.
Yep.
And so I think what happened next is I went home, and then I was like, how am I going to do this? Like, am I going to wait a whole nother week? What if she misses a week? Then it's 2 weeks, and she's only here for the summer. And so...
Okay, mind you, it wasn't even that long ago, but it was not a thing to, like, find someone on Instagram and, like, slide into their DMs.
Right, at all.
Like, I don't even think I was on Snapchat. Like, they don't really do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And that was not a thing. And I would even say, even though you have those options, like, in person is, like, the best option.
Yeah, which is not what I did.
Sorry, I did not mean to say that to, like,
no,
downgrade
I'm
what you
owning
did.
it. I'm like, which...
I think you also knew I was only there for a limited time and was going to be leaving, too.
Yeah, and I didn't have your number, didn't really have access to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did something that I would not encourage any of our other pastors to do, but I had access to Jenaye's phone number because
I filled out the Connect card like a good first-time guest.
She had gone to that table and asked how to get more involved, and so I swiped her number off the card, and I texted her, and I said, hey, this is Josh, you know.
No, let me just guide you.
This is where Jenaye's memory really kicks in.
We also referenced the story of me catching the bouquet the night before Josh, or the night of Josh texting me. And I was with friends at this wedding, and I just get this text that says, hey, this is Josh, wondering if you want to get coffee tomorrow. And I sat there, and I was like, Josh? Who?
Yeah, see, not love at first sight.
Who are Joshes that have my number? So I think through, and the only Joshes I knew were married. And I was like, but we're also, I think, in ministry. There was like Josh to cook. And then there's like another Josh, but they're married and in ministry. And so I thought, okay, it probably has to do with, and in Bismarck. Like I was like, I don't know. It took me a while to figure out.
What did I say in the text?
Hi, this is Josh.
And
wondering if you want to get coffee.
Okay.
That's it.
That's it.
Still to this day, we fight the vagueness that is Josh's communication.
It's true.
And you've grown so much. But just even that of like the last name. So it took me a while. And I remember going to Qdoba with a friend, but I was the next day and was like, I'm pretty sure this is the Josh that is texting me. And then it was like, oh, that makes sense. Like I said, I wanted to get involved. He's probably going to like give me a list of like the Bible studies I can get involved in or whatever. So the next day went to Starbucks. And then Josh bought my coffee. And I was like, oh.
He wants to get involved.
No. No.
Sorry, I have jokes.
But I remember my best friend. You all should have a best friend like this. My best friend, Leah. You guys, I will reference my best friend, Leah. Can
I just back up before you talk about Leah? I sent that text and the Connect card was like sitting next to me on my counter at my house. And right when I sent it, it was like the voice of the Holy Spirit came in the form of my roommate, Kevin. He walked down the steps and he looked at me and he goes, what did you just do? I was like, I did it. I texted.
Oh my gosh, you're funny.
It's true.
But I remember before going to Starbucks, I was talking with Leah, and she was like, Jenaye, is this like a date? Is he? I was like, no, he's a pastor. No, it's not. And she's like, Jenaye, like once you're in like your 20s, like once you're past a certain age, like and you're hanging out with the opposite sex, like it's a thing. Like it should be going towards that. And if it's not, this dude is off, is what she said. And I was like, no, I really think it's like ministry stuff, like no. And so she kind of was the voice of reason going into it. And I'll just never forget leaving that coffee date when it was like, oh no, it wasn't about ministry. It was like about your family, like tell me about your life, all that stuff. And we talked for like a long time. And that was the thing for me. I was like, oh, I can like get along with this person and he's really easy for me to talk to. And was that, I think at that same time, then you're like, oh, would you want to like come hang over at my house and watch the NDSU football game?
Yeah, there was a game on.
Something like that.
And we had people over to our house often, so it wasn't like a crazy thing to be like, hey, come hang out.
No, and it wasn't like just us. It was just
there's other people
there's
there.
always people. It was like, you just love that house where it's like all your friends are in and out. Like your guys' house was a very fond memory of that.
That's honestly like people who are like not married yet or single right now, especially younger, like college students or young, like get involved with other young adults from church and just spend time together. Open your home.
Yes.
Like, enjoy each other's company and do life
it was like
together.
the door would open. I loved that culture. Like the door would open. You're like, oh, who's here?
Yeah.
And it was just this like really great community. So we did that and hung out. And I think I was like, oh, okay, this is a thing. But you didn't really like address that it was a thing. And then it was like, okay, the next day, like, okay, do you want to go play tennis?
And I mean, in my defense, I was cautious because like there's a lot of people watching my life. Like I'd been in a relationship.
No, Josh chose to go to coffee the day everyone was at Sunshine Festival. He knew like everyone was gone at this Christian music festival, so no one would see us, which I didn't realize all this stuff of how cautious you were and like. But I would say it was wisdom of like, you didn't want people to like see us and then people start talking. And because of being a pastor at the church that people might like poke their nose in where they actually have not been given privilege to. Right. But yeah, it was like we went and did tennis and then we'd stay up late like with your friends and stuff and played Nerds. If you play
Lots
Nerds.
of Nerds, yeah.
That's a fun card game. So doing all that, and then what happened?
And then we went to Starbucks again.
He gave Starbucks. If there was Joy House at that time, we would just have been at Joy House. But
and this is probably, it's a funny part of our story, but it's also like, I was just a pretty passive person still. And, and maybe just had a fear of being intentional and really putting myself out there. And so we got coffee again. And I kind of knew in the back of my mind, like, I should like let her know where this is going and what I'm thinking, but still was trying to like get to know her. And I love a sure thing.
I was going to say, the other thing about Josh is before he has a conversation, he would like to know exactly how that conversation is going to go before he has it, which is not reality.
Doesn't work. Yeah. And like I've had to work through that a lot in leadership. And
we were just talking to the people who are here in the room of like, do you know what the DTR is? And they're all like, they're young. So they're like, no. And at that time in our culture, it was like the DTR was the define the relationship.
Yeah,
like have you had the DTR yet? And I remember Leah or someone, I think it was Leah, was like, well, he needs to DTR this thing like right now. And if he does not, like you need to be out. And I was like, no, I agree. Like it needs to be defined. Yep. So I had said, on this hangout, if he does not do this, then I will ask at the end. And Starbucks had closed. We had stayed until they're like, you got to leave. And then we're in the parking lot and he was like saying goodbye. And I just was like,
I mean,
right.
we closed down the place. I thought that was clear enough about where things are going. No. It was not.
No. And so I just said, I think I would like to talk about where this is going. And I remember vividly just being like, I want to communicate to him, like, I'm not messing around. Like, I am not just going to hang out with a dude just to hang out. And I think that was not decided when I was hanging out with Josh. That was decided before I started hanging out with Josh. And I had determined my value. I had determined what I was going to value in the pursuit of my heart. And no matter how cute or how charming anyone was, that was not going to be swayed.
Yeah, and I was actually drawn to that rather than like, you could have been like, oh, whatever you want, it's fine. Like, but I was drawn to like, oh, she knows who she is. Like, she's not going to mess around. Like, she has the boldness to get clarity for herself. I remember walking out of that front door of that coffee shop about 12 steps into the parking lot and you turned to me and you just said, I need to know where this is going.
Yeah, I would like, we can project that I like took control of the relationship, but no, it was a question.
And we had been talking for hours before that.
Yes.
So it wasn't like she
was
stopped
no
me on the street and
opportunity.
said, hey.
Yeah, so then we sat down on the curb and just talked through it. And I was about to leave in like 6 weeks and go to Omaha and finish clinicals there. I still had a year and a half of school. And do you remember the conclusion of that conversation?
No, I remember my response when you said that you wanted to know where things were going. And I think my voice cracked.
Yeah.
And I said, you want to talk about that now?
Yeah.
But the conclusion was we were going to proceed with caution.
That's exactly what it was. We talked through all these things. And then we both agreed, okay, we'd like to proceed. And he's like, I just want to proceed with caution. Like, I don't really know what that meant now. I mean, I think it was like, we don't
really
know
weird,
the future. Though. This would be long distance if we did it. You want to go into PT. I'm going into ministry. This is just very confusing. We didn't know each other
super well.
We didn't. Yeah. And so then we just like kept like hanging out. And then, okay, we probably should have like reviewed this before we dove into this conversation. Well, we don't have to walk through every little step.
I would just own as a guy, like that there were so many times in the process of that relationship and things that happened that just my fear and my passivity just caused a lot of pain and a lot of confusion.
So what would you do differently today?
Yeah, I'd be like just way more honest. Because I think at the end of the day, it wasn't about like, oh, you have to say everything you're feeling or everything you're thinking. But I think I just would have been like more honest about where I was at, about my intentions. Like I remember when you left you were going back to UND or to Omaha, and I was so concerned about what people were going to think. And I remember you leaving the UG that night, and I wasn't
my last night at the UG. Like my car was packed. I was gonna drive like 3 hours and then go the next day drive like 9 hours.
Yeah.
And I was like waiting around. We'd been hanging out for weeks, and I was kind of waiting around for like Josh to say bye. And I was like, he's not coming to say bye to me.
And it was like after a service, and I kind of just justified it by being like in pastor mode.
And other people were around you and all this stuff. And I remember then I just went up to you and I was like, okay, bye.
Like to a group of us and said bye. And I was like, yep, see you.
See ya. Pat on the back, which still to this day, if he hugs me and pats me on the back, I say, I am not a dog. You hug me like a human.
Don't pat me.
Yeah, don't pat me.
But then honestly, one of my best friends was like, are you serious? Like, are you going to let her leave like that? You know? And I kind of had this moment of, oh my gosh.
And so I think it takes those friends that call that out in us.
Totally.
Of like,
another reason to be in community.
Call out your passivity or call out your fear of man. And yes, I would say now, probably in the last 2 years, you've really stepped into losing that fear of man, losing that fear of other people's opinions, because that
just
translates
defining
to
yourself
other areas. Yeah, not in a way of I'm gonna do whatever I want.
No,
you think.
But I was talking to somebody about this week. Like when you withhold and you don't show your cards, which is kind of how I was always that way.
Yeah.
You know, you feel like you're protecting yourself, but what you're actually doing is you're giving the people around you the confusion of not knowing where you stand on anything.
Yeah.
Like a failure to define yourself and say, no, here's my boundary, here's my belief, here's what I feel, here's what I think. People don't actually get to know you.
Yeah.
You know, and that's been a lifetime thing that I've had to work on, you know, of no, it's okay for me to define myself, even if I get hurt or even if I come on too strong or even if I don't say it exactly the right way.
Totally. And even at that point, we had not like put a title on anything. We were very afraid of titles. I think both of us were like, we're just going to get to know each other because I want to know who you are. And so then I went to Omaha, and we continued talking probably, I don't know, 4 more weeks or something. And then what I would say is we broke up. Josh would say we never broke up because we were never dating.
Eventually we went to marriage counseling and we had to fill out like the pre-marriage assessment. And it said on the first page, like all the information about us and about our families. And it said and we had not seen the assessment before we walked in. And it said number of times you broke up. And Josh, it said 0. And Jenaye, it said once. And I was like, what?
I'm like, do you remember when we were on FaceTime? And you're like, I think we need to end this. What is this, Josh?
This was that undefined thing that I was a part of.
But I think we had, we're going to talk about dating. And we put up boundaries that were good. And I want to talk about what we do differently, but I want to talk about what we do not regret. And I think in that moment of him saying, okay, I remember the conclusion of that conversation was saying, I like you, but like our life paths are not aligning. Our life purposes, like you're going to PT, a year and a half of school left. Like this makes zero sense to me.
And I had people speaking into my life too that like had hesitancy because you were in Omaha, you were going into PT. You know?
The people who did have opinions, like I wasn't like a lot of people weren't very for it.
And they didn't make it based on you. It was based on our situation, you know?
Truly, yeah. And I just remember from those boundaries, from me not being this like, ooh, oh my gosh, my identity is in what this guy thinks of me. Like I was sad when we hung up, but it was like my world didn't crumble. Yeah. And to me, that was like, oh, God is my strength. Like I was so encouraged of like in my season of singleness leading up, I feel like God had done so much in my heart to create in me like a security in him to where, yeah, when you ended things from my perspective, I didn't crumble. Like I was sad. I was off social media for a while because I just didn't want to go down an unhealthy path of like stalking and all that stuff. And I think some of you need to listen to that. Like that's wisdom, you know, if you're doing that, that's unhealthy, and have the self-control to like abstain from social media if that's what you're going to do.
Well, there are moments where we become overly dependent on other people, and to break that dependence, you have to rip off the Band-Aid. Like you have to cut something off before it destroys you.
Yeah.
You know?
And even mind you, as we hung out, we didn't put a title on it, but like we weren't like snuggling and holding hands. We weren't like, it was like we were intentionally hanging out as two adults, getting to know one another because that's what matters more in that season. So we took whatever this period is called, breakup period. And then I finished my clinicals.
We were on a break.
Oh my goodness. No. So I still had my best of friends were in Bismarck. Like I loved Bismarck. I loved this town. That was not going to stop. And so when I was done with clinicals, I came back to Bismarck to visit friends. And I just remember thinking like, this is kind of weird. Do I give them a heads up that I'm coming back? Like, is it going to be weird? So I feel like we might be going into too many details. But
yeah, we can move along. We can fast forward.
So went into Christmas break, all these different things. The conviction of the Lord eventually fell upon Josh, you messed up. But I got a text from Josh at Christmas, and it was like, hey, sorry, I'm not going to do the voice. I do this voice sometimes.
Because it was legit. It was legit. The problem is, I'm like, Jenaye, you use the same voice for me, your brother.
Okay, no, sometimes I'll... Like,
go ahead, do the voice now. They're
I'll be
wondering
like,
about
oh, I'm Josh. Hey, Jenaye. And he's like, I don't sound like that. No, wait, you say, I don't sound like that. No.
Let's take a poll. Do I sound like that?
He thinks he just doesn't like the voice I use to imitate. I just use a deeper voice indicating you're the man. But I get a text from him that's like, hey, my back, something. Like, are there some good stretches that would help this? And I'm like, okay. And I was like, yeah, I'll help him. Like, still a friend, whatever. And I look at these stretches, and my stepsister, who I lived with in Omaha when this whole like breakup thing happened, she saw it and she's like, whatever, this is such an excuse to talk to you. And I was like, no, and also you guys, I just don't assume stuff like that, which I think has protected me from stuff. So I just helped you with your exercises and left it at that. And I don't really remember what happened. Eventually I come back to Bismarck and we just met and just kind of wanted to clear the air.
Yeah. And I totally was like, I went into that Christmas thing like, I think I made a mistake. Like, I still want to get to know her. And
so now, would you ask about exercises for your back pain?
No, I think I would own it. But
you'd probably say, hey, I screwed up. I'd like to meet. So we got coffee just to like clear the air. And like, I think I said, I just want some clarity. And just, it wasn't like I was mad. I just wanted to talk.
And I think to validate it, neither one of us was there to like mess around and to like, we're just going to date because it's fun.
I think the thing that I love and appreciate about you and about us is there was never games, and there never has been games.
Yeah.
It's not some like cat and mouse, or if I can do this, or no. And I'm like so thankful for that. And I think that's your heart.
Yeah, because I do think even if I broke the ice by being like, oh, it's my back, PT, like we did have intentional conversations.
Yeah, and I don't think it was a game. I think in the maturity of what you knew at the time, you're like, I want to make contact, but I'm not bold enough to be like, I screwed up. I still really like you, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So you found not a lie. You Did you actually do the exercises?
I think I did because
I think you did.
in
I think it
pain.
was legit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you didn't lie. But I remember we sat at this same Starbucks, man, Century Starbucks. That was our place. And we just kind of cleared the air. And I remember what you just couldn't get past was like our life paths and like my schooling and long distance and like all of that. Like that's what you kept saying. And I said,
And
okay,
again,
so it's
I
not.
like predictable outcomes.
Yeah. And I said,
and
okay,
it
so
was
it's not like me. Like, was it, was it anything I did or, was there, none of it was like, oh, you're like, we don't get along or we don't, I don't know, you annoy me. That could be legit, And I said, okay, I think the question I would just pose to you is like, do you date a person or do you date a situation? And everything that you're describing is situational and circumstantial. And I said, so that's just kind of my question is like, I think you should think about that. And right? Is that how I presented it?
Yeah, we had a couple of conversations about that question. And because it's a very clear question, but there's implications of it both ways, and I remember us talking a lot about that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting for me to look back and talk about this because I'm like, it had to have been the Lord, like influencing my mind because I am not natural of like, oh, you need like a year and a half to just ponder this. Okay. Like, it's like, no, be decisive, please. So I think the Lord gave me a divine like patience, but I wasn't like, I'm going to hold out for Josh. No, I just was like, I like him, but I know my life will move on and I will be fine.
Yeah.
If this is not what it is. So eventually we do end up dating.
Long distance was really challenging for us because I very much am like a present where I am kind of person.
Yeah. So long distance will reveal a lot in your communication.
But what was good about it is we really built like the emotional, intentional side of our relationship rather than like the other parts of it.
It wasn't
during
about
that
being in
season.
close proximity physically.
Yeah.
That's not what it was about. The other thing to note is we've referenced my past and my rebellion. And from that, when I came to know the Lord, I would say the one thing that God identified in me was like, hey, yeah, there's a weakness in like relationships and boundaries and things like that. And so I had someone say, you need to seek the Lord and you need to set your boundaries with God for future relationships before you're in one, before you even like someone, because your emotions and your heart is fleeting. And so I was seeking God and in his word and praying and worshiping. And I'm like, yeah, like learning to hear God's voice. And I felt God say, the next time you kiss a man, it will be the one that has pursued your heart enough to get down on one knee. And I thought that's where the whole be 80 and have cats came from. Because I was like, no, I'm going to end up alone.
Nobody's going to go for that.
But when God asks you to do something, I'm sorry, we better do it.
Right.
Because I would rather stand rightly before God than sit in my sorrow or like, oh, I'm lonely or whatever.
Yeah, and I think sometimes in relationships, somebody will have the higher conviction or like they'll feel like, no, this is how we need to live. This is how we need to walk. And they're with somebody who continually tries to like pull them down into like, no, I have needs or I don't feel like you love me. And I'm like, I am sorry, but you always rise. Yeah, you need to rise to the conviction that is higher in those situations.
And we had that conversation. So one of our first dates, we went to a friend's wedding. They had waited 5 years. They dated 5 years. They had decided to wait to kiss till their wedding day. And I remember us sitting at that wedding like, this is kind of semi-awkward that we're witnessing this. But like, I'm so happy for them. And wow, like they like have so much self-control. And we were in the car driving away and we were talking about that and just like how interesting and cool and happy we are for them. And you had said like, or I think I said, so what do you think about that? And you're like, oh, I mean, I don't think that would be for me, but good for them. And I said, okay, well, interestingly enough, I feel like God very clearly told me that kissing will not be a part of my dating for me.
Which is so funny because in college, I was like very legalistic about that. About, like,
and my heart was not legalism. It was just more, I trust God knows me better than me. Yes. Yeah. God knows me better than me. And so he knows what's best for me. And I'm going to trust that. And so I said that and I was like, oh, he's going to be like, this is as done as it started. I want to put this into part 1 and part 2. I keep saying
that's fine. We'll just keep talking.
We're going to keep talking, and we might cut this off at some point and do a part 2 of this continued conversation. But, and I also just think it caught you off guard, obviously, because you did not expect that.
Mm-hmm.
But you handled it so graciously. And in that moment, that's what you said is you're like, well, that's not what God has spoken to me. But I believe that in this relationship, we will always honor who has the higher conviction. And what we mean by that is, so let's say, how do you describe who would have a higher conviction?
The one, it's that same kind of question of like, okay, what can we do that's permissible within our dating relationship? That's maybe not a sin. It's not stepping out of bounds. And my conviction is I'm okay getting really close to that line. And you're like, no, I want that line like a block away down the street.
Right.
Then you go with the person who's like, you're not going to ask them to violate. Well, I'm over here. I'm closer to the line and you need to come my way because that's how I feel. When that's their conviction, you need to honor that conviction. And
that will play out, if that's the person you end up with, that'll play out through your marriage. That'll play out through your relationship and everything. I mean, that's come into parenting. That's come into, right now, we're in a situation where we have a financial decision. I feel a conviction one way about giving something that's very high value away. Josh does not have that conviction yet. And so...
Yet. She's like, it's coming.
Okay. You do not have that conviction. I'll remove the word yet and say, but we operate out of unity. And so we're not in unity yet.
And God's going to move one of us.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to hear you. I'm going to pray about this. Maybe it's that we sell it and then we give this portion away. But my natural bend, we'll talk about this in finances, is, let's just give everything away. And Josh is like, okay, let's rein this in a little bit and use wisdom.
Can I just say something? Because I waited to even hold Jenaye's hand for like a year after I knew her.
1 year.
Okay. And I know people swallow hard when they hear me say that.
Yeah.
Because
I'm not mocking it. I'm grateful for it.
No, and I was attracted to her and, wanted to do that. But what I do not regret and what I would own to this day is that we built an emotional intimacy long before we ever even really touched each other.
Yes.
That now with the things that we've walked through in our lives with being on a cruise ship and almost losing our kids, and the difficulties of leadership and our son
dry seasons of marriage, which everyone walks through.
Yeah. Our son our first child going into the NICU and not knowing what was wrong with him. We have been able to bear emotional burdens together because we have a strength, I think, together in unity in that area because of how we started it from the beginning. A lot of people don't do that. They build immediately on the physical.
Which will not uphold you in trauma, in
and they
conflict.
don't build the spiritual, they don't build the emotional, and then you get down the road and you're like, oh man, we either have to build this bridge now, in the midst of difficulty, or it doesn't work and it crumbles.
And it's possible. There is no condemnation in Christ.
No, totally.
God can do anything, and he can work in whatever situation. But man, so this is where for those of you who maybe are not yet married or you're in this process, that is what we were very conservative. We do not regret it one bit. It protected us. I did know that I loved Josh before he ever held my hand. But because of the physical boundaries we had set, Josh knew. Once I hold her hand, we also committed to not say I love you until we were engaged because that word gets so thrown around. And it is such a powerful word and it is such a powerful emotion. And so he knew, once I hold her hand, that is a very short timeline. If we are going to wait until marriage, if we're going to not live together until marriage, we're going to honor each other and all of this, that's a quick timeline. And
I think there's
there's
an accountability in that of hey, let's either poop or get off the pot. If we're dating and it's been a year and a half, and I was 28, if you're 20, maybe you try to date a little bit longer to make sure you get to know that person.
But there is something, and I've always said, if you are dating in a God-honoring way, and what I mean by that is you are not physically intimate, and I would even go as far to say of what you're viewing together, what you're talking about together. And I think when we say intimate, that doesn't just mean sex. If you're in compromising, cuddling positions, come on, use wisdom. Don't go horizontal, stay vertical. Well, actually, that doesn't even always pertain. Just use wisdom. thank you so much for joining today's podcast and the conversation that we're having. It was so wonderful that it went really long. And so we decided to cut it here, and we're going to come back with part 2 of this continued conversation next week. So be sure to come back and catch the rest of this conversation. Also, remember to subscribe to the podcast if you have not yet, and also rate it if you're enjoying it. Leave a review or share it with your friends. Maybe it would encourage someone. We appreciate you so much, and just thank you for being along for this journey with us.